Welcome to the third video of the Python Fundamental series. Today we'll be talking about control flow. Understanding control flow is a very important concept in Python programming or programming in general. Today we'll be talking about conditional statements, loops, breaks and continues, pass, and nested control flow. So what are conditional statements? Basically, conditional statements allow you to execute code based on whether a condition is true or false. And within Python, we have statements like if, else if, and else. So every conditional statement start off with an if statement, and the program will always begin within the if statement to evaluate whether the condition you provided is true. And if it's true, it will execute whatever's inside the if statement. You can provide an else if as a second statement within the conditional statement block. The program will go into the else if statement if the initial if statement is false. And if the if statement is true, it will execute the statement within the else if. And finally, the else is used for essentially a catch-all statement, and it will execute if all the conditions above are false. And bear in mind, the else statement is actually not a requirement, so you don't have to include an else statement. So here's a simple example on how to use conditional statements. So here we have a person that is of age 18, and we have a conditional statement to check whether the person is a child, a teenager, or an adult. So if it's a child, he has to be less than 13 years old. If it's a teenager, it will have to be less than 18. And if it's anything above 18, they will be an adult. So here we see since the age is 18, it will first evaluate the first conditional statement, and it will be false. And then it will go into the second conditional statement to evaluate whether 18 is less than 18. And since that is false, it will end up going into the else. So if we were to print out the result and see what we get, we will get you're an adult since it's 18. And we can test it out. Say we have an age of 10. In this case, we'll expect that the program will print out you're a child. So this is a simple example on how to use conditional statements. If statements, if else statements are very powerful, and you can start nesting the conditional statements to get some interesting functionalities. So within conditional statements, there's something called a ternary operator, and essentially a ternary operator is a shorthand for a simple if-else statements. So if you have a binary decision, which is something that's one or the other, you can use a shorthand if-else statement. And the syntax is essentially you want to have the value if true, and then you have the if condition, and then you have the else condition. So using the example above of checking a person's age, say we want to just only check whether a person is an adult or a minor, we have a binary option, then we can definitely use the ternary operator. So in here, we're essentially saying print adult if age is greater or equal to 18, else print minor. So since we have the age as 20, we would expect that the program will print out adult. So this is a simple example of the ternary operator. So it's pretty handy to use when you only have a decision that has two options, since it's a lot more readable. So let's move on to loops. In Python, loops allows you to repeat a block of code multiple times. So within Python, we can use a for loop and a while loop. You would usually use a for loop when you want to iterate over a sequence, such as a list, a tuple, a string, or a range. The basic syntax of a for loop is the for keyword, and then you want to declare a variable that will be used to reference each item in the sequence and then the sequence itself. And then you want to indent a statement or whatever you want to do for the loop. So an example of using a for loop would be, say we have a list of fruits, apple, banana, and cherry, and we want to print out each value in this list once. What we could do is use the for loop to print out the values in the list. So we'd say for fruit, which is the variable that you're going to reference within the list, in fruits, which is the fruits list. And then the indented statement would just be print fruit. So if we were to run this, you would see that we'll print out all the fruits in the list. So a common function that you always see within for loops is the range function. Essentially, the range functions creates a list of numbers that you can iterate over. So you can see in this example, we're having for I in range 5, then we would want to print out I. So essentially, we'll print out 0 to 4. And if we run the script, we can see that it's printed out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Moving on to while loops. So while loops is a type of loop that will constantly run the block of code as long as the conditions evaluates it true, and it will not stop until it's become false. And this is something that you want to bear in mind, because you can essentially get stuck in an infinite loop if the while loop never stops. So you always want to have a condition in place to exit the while loop. And the syntax is basically just while, and then you give the condition, and then you have the block of code that you want to repeat. So let me run through this example of a while loop. First, we want to initiate a count being 0, and then we want to start the while loop, and we want to run it as long as count is less than 5. And within the while loop, we want to print the count, and then before we restart the while loop, we want to increase the count by 1. So in this example, we'll print out 0 to 4, and if we were to run the program, we can see it does just that. Essentially, the while loop will stop when the count becomes 5, because this will evaluate to false, and then the program stops. So if you were ever in a situation where you're stuck in a while loop and the program keeps printing and running, for example, say we run the program, we'd expect the program to be printing infinitely and be stuck in a while loop. What you could do is press Ctrl C if you're on a Mac, and you can interrupt the script and it will exit the entire script. So moving on to breaks and continue. These statements are usually used to control the flow of a loop. So you want to use a break when you want to exit the loop immediately, and you want to use continue when you just want to skip that current iteration and it moves on to the next iteration within the loop. In this example, we're going to showcase the break statement. Essentially, we're having a for loop that will print out a range between 0 to 9, but we want to break it when I equals to 5. So then essentially the program will stop printing at 4. And if we run the script, we can see that it has printed 0 to 4. To showcase the continue statement, we're going to have a for loop with a range 0 to 9, and we want to only print the odd numbers. So how we're going to do that is to have an if statement within the loop, and every time I equals an even number, in here we use modulus 2 equals 0, which means there's no remainder. We will skip that iteration and continue on to the next iteration until we finish. So if we were to have a look at the script, we can see that the script has only printed out all the odd numbers from 1 to 9. Moving on to the pass statement. The pass statement is essentially just a placeholder for any empty blocks of code, and essentially tells the program to do nothing for now. So here, as an example, we can see that we're checking whether if x is greater than 5. If it is, do nothing, and if it isn't, you want to print out x is small. And since x is equal to 6, the program will do nothing. See, when we run it, it just exits out of itself. And finally, I want to talk about nested control flow. I think you've seen from the previous examples above, you can actually nest in if statements and conditional statements within loops, or you can nest loops within conditional statements. And there you have it. That was a simple overview of the fundamental concepts of control flow. Thank you for watching to the end of the third video of the Python Fundamental series. I hope you learned something new, and stay tuned for other videos within the Python Fundamental series.